I was having a conversation with a student this morning, and we were talking about the nature of the brain and the memory and the soul, and how these three things may be the same, they may be different, and uh, and there was the orangutan research, where the orangutan had, I think, 20 different sign words to describe something, and Wittgenstein, in contrast to, I mean, he was contradicted, he was criticised by John Aspinall. Wittgenstein said that animals are incapable of speech, and speech is only one form of communication. And I think he was talking specifically about lions. And Aspinall said, well, he didn't have very much experience of living with lions. And Peter Singer said that really we should include animals in the moral community, as indeed I think Buddhism does, because they are conscious beings. And Descartes would say that consciousness begins in the womb. We have consciousness in sleep. And Descartes would link consciousness to what it is to be a person. But then, you've still got the question about what happens if the brain is diminished, let's say by Alzheimer's, by being mentally ill, by taking drugs, by being in a coma. Is somebody an ex-person or not? Is somebody less of a person simply because they've done something wrong, or because they are dehumanized in some way by law? The caste system puts them in a lower position than everybody else. Whether this is because of color, or because of heritage, or whatever. And I think this is fascinating. And while we were doing this, I was I was thinking of something that I'd been told yesterday about a Welsh Catholic saint who is actually a dog, Saint Guinefort. He's not actually Welsh. He is rather a dog associated with France, and he was a legendary greyhound, venerated as a saint in the Middle Ages, particularly in France near Lyon. And the story goes that this dog was a loyal pet of a nobleman, and one day the nobleman left his infant child alone in the castle while he went out hunting. And upon his return he found the room in chaos. Guinefort was covered in blood, and the crib was overturned. And believing the dog had killed his child, the nobleman immediately killed Guinefort in a fit of rage. But on closer inspection, he discovered that the baby was unharmed, and that the blood was from a snake that Guinefort had killed to protect the child. Very much Lady and the Tramp stuff. Realizing his tragic mistake, the nobleman and local villagers buried Guinefort and began venerating him as a protector of children, and pilgrims began visiting the dog's grave, seeking blessings for their children, and the cult of St. Guinefort persisted for centuries, despite repeated efforts by the Catholic Church to suppress it. But Guinefort was never officially recognized as a saint by the Church. In fact, in the 13th century, the Dominican Inquisitor Stephen of Bourbon condemned the cult as superstitious nonsense and heresy, but local devotion continued for centuries. And while Guinefort is not in fact Welsh, the tale has echoes of Gelert, the legendary dog of Prince Llewellyn of the Great of Wales, who was similarly slain after being mistaken for harming a child while he was actually protecting it. So I think that's heartening. And when you look at the stories of St. Francis and St. Sergius and the bears, there's a sense that Christianity is perhaps not as dismissive of animals as sometimes it might appear. And I think we share our time with animals. And I certainly had two devoted, and I was very devoted to them, two devoted cats, three actually, because I had a cat earlier, and we had a very good relationship. And I hope to have cats in the future, or dogs, or horses or whatever. I like the animal kingdom, and I like the communication that we can have with our animal colleagues and friends, and I find it unthinkable that communication is not valued, and that animals can be dismissed as soulless, or unthinking, or not communicating, because something doesn't communicate in the way that we communicate. Because something can't articulate things in English doesn't mean that it is inferior. We cannot identify what the soul is. We see it only in the construct of the spatial obstruction of the body. And is there evidence of a soul from neuroscience, from anything other than religion? No, not really. Can magnetic resonance imagery identify it? No. Does it mean it isn't there? No. No, simply because science can't see something doesn't mean it is a non-existent. Simply because the authorities say something is not appropriate doesn't mean it really is not appropriate. Simply because St. Guinefort or Gellert is not recognized by the wider community doesn't mean it's that these dogs were not important. They were highly important, and they are highly important. And the idea of protection, which these dogs represent, is, I think, highly important. Loyalty, protection, service, and friendship.